Hi guys, it's Siara, the host of GecksandSpecs. It is currently 2:34 a.m. PST right now, and this is the third time I had to film this because the first time it just didn't pick up my mic. The second time there was a file error, so now we here go on try 3. But basically, more or less, through episodes 5 and 7, I was sick. I had a cold, and I could have, but I didn't really want to reschedule the interviews due to the fact that I was really busy with work. And two of the interviews had been planned like a month to 6 weeks in advance, especially this one with Ethan. And it didn't feel right to cancel, even though I had a minor cold. In episodes 5 and 6, I think I make a few weird noises. But in episode 7, there's definitely a couple audio discrepancies, and I definitely noticed some. I mean, they're not horrible. I'm not super close to the mic, dying in it, but you definitely hear me cough a few times and a couple those kind of noises because I have, I guess, a decent mic that decides to pick up every little noise my body makes, and that's great. But point being, yeah, that's kind of in there, and I'm not able to edit it out because it's at points where I'm talking or Ethan is talking, and if I were to cut it out, it would just make a weird kind of noise. It wouldn't sound right. Because I definitely did try, and it didn't work, guys. But yeah, I understand some people listen to podcasts to fall asleep at night, as do I, and so I just didn't want to put that in there, and then it jolt somebody awake or something, or so it's just a little disclaimer. If you still want to listen, that's cool. Like I said, it's not super close to the mic, I'm dying, but it is in the background. You will hear me cough and sniffle a little. But yeah, if you still want to listen, that's awesome. Thank you so much for the support, guys. I really appreciate it. Okay, I swear I'm done after this, but I just wanted to mention that to prove how much my mic picks up, literally you can hear that in the background when I was recording this, and that's just literally me touching my PJ pants. Yeah. Okay, I'm done, I swear. Enjoy the episode, guys. Hi guys, welcome back to Gex and Specs and Friends. Today I am joined by Ethan from Radiant Reptilia. I'm going to give him the floor to introduce himself. So hey Ethan.
Hey Siara, thanks so much for having me on Gex and Specs. Yeah, my name's Ethan. I have a YouTube channel, Radiant Reptilia, and then I also sell reptiles online at radiantreptilia.com. So you can check me out at either or of those places. Yeah, great to be on the show.
I'm really excited for this one. So maybe to get a bit into it, I just wanted to ask you originally, what made you start wanting to rescue and rehabilitate? What gave you the idea to start doing that, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so to understand kind of where that came from, so you need to understand that I'm someone who's always been into reptiles, right? And I've always loved the idea of being able to build a business or build some sort of model that allows me to do reptiles in a way that's going to allow me to
Mhm.
really really enjoy what I'm doing, but also turn that into money somehow so I can sustain off that, so that way I can be doing what I'm loving for a living. That's kind of my goal. And when I first got into kind of so yeah, I really got into reptiles just about 2 years ago, or got into selling reptiles about 2 years ago. And really, what kind of opened the door is I just realized how many animals there were out there that were in need of new homes, and I saw that as kind of a twofold opportunity. One, I had a chance to help all these really awesome animals, right, and that was going to be fun, and that was going to be a great experience for me.
Mhm.
And then two, if I had some way that I could turn that into a workable business model as well, right, because if I can turn anything into a business model, I can do more of it. And
Yeah.
then I can ideally help more animals because I'm able to put more time towards it because it's actually making dollars for me, so I can sustain myself on that. And that's sort of where my interest in the reptile business world kind of became a thing. And I started. We went public in early 2018, and I've been doing that under a couple different brand names basically ever since then.
That's awesome. So honestly, out of curiosity, what's the most interesting species you've gotten to work with while doing this, in your
Oh
opinion?
gosh. Okay, yeah, so that's a tough question.
Okay.
I've worked with probably over 100 species by now, which is really, really great.
Oh wow, yeah.
I don't know if I could pin it down to one most interesting species. I definitely go in phases where like I'm just obsessed with individual reptiles for like a month because it's like a new species I got in. And I get to learn all about caring for it and watch it feed and watch it do all these
Yeah.
different things. Probably what I've been most obsessed with in the last couple months is an Amazon tree boa that we got in. It is an absolutely wild animal. It's really, really crazy. She actually just found a new home just a couple weeks ago,
Oh,
but she was
awesome.
really, yeah, she was really, really cool animal to work with. Just such weird body proportions, a big triangular head and this really slender neck. And then, if you look at are you familiar with like boas, how their bodies are like square-ish?
Mhm.
Well, the Amazon tree boa, it's almost rectangular. It's very weird. It's like a cross section of its body is taller than it is wide.
Oh
It's a
wow.
very weird shaped animal. Yeah, it's like a tall rectangle. Very, very wild. But that's been what I've been obsessing over probably the most in the last couple months. She was a lot of fun. And then of course they have that really fiery attitude. I don't know if listeners aren't familiar with Amazon tree boas. They're notoriously kind of defensive animals and certainly not afraid to strike if they feel threatened or annoyed or anything of that sort. And she definitely loves to bite and loves to nip around and everything. So yeah, she's just a ton of fun to work with, or she was, and I'm looking forward to getting another one in soon.
Oh, okay. So like for you personally, do you prefer like more animals with like attitude or do you prefer more docile, like out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think both have their like merits. Like, if I'm gonna sit down and watch a movie, right? I'd like a bearded dragon to come chill with me or something.
Yeah.
Something that's a lot more chill. But I do also enjoy animals that have a lot of attitude and a lot of character. I think they're just kind of fun and exhilarating to work with. Like tokay geckos. If I was ever gonna keep a gecko as a personal pet, it would probably be a tokay gecko. Um, up till now, I haven't had any geckos as personal pets. Actually, almost all the geckos I've worked with were rehomes. Um, but if I ever were to get a gecko as a personal pet, it would probably be a toka gecko, just because they have such a fiery little personality.
Oh no, I totally agree. Like I love tokays. Like I really want one day. Like I just find them so fascinating and interesting, especially like how you notice like I don't know if you know a lot, but like they're very adaptable to their environment as well. Like they're just really
Yeah,
interesting. And the fact that they're so small but like so like big personality and not afraid of you and not like willing they're more fight than flight. And you don't really find that in a lot of geckos that size. Like most of them are like,
yeah,
I'm gonna go. Like
yeah.
even
They're.
oh go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say they're not the largest species of gecko, but I think they're like number two, right after the Lichianas. They get massive. I think they get they can the maximum size they can reach is like 14 inches. They get like huge. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I know they get really really big.
I mean, I just meant more like in the size compared to like a human being. Like, like
Oh yeah,
you would think that their form of defense would be like bye, but instead they're very vocal and they're very
sure.
known to strike. And I don't know, I just really like tokays. Like I like their attitude. Definitely, but I mean, any gecko, like I feel like people don't realize that even like stuff like bearded dragons and like leopard geckos have the ability to have that defensiveness to them as well, though. Like I've definitely worked with a few leopard geckos that have had a bit of a defensive streak going on. Um,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah,
um,
usually the only leopard geckos I've ever gotten in that were like super defensive were ones that came from like abusive homes or whatever. And when I say abusive, not typically the person that's abusing them, but I've had several leopard geckos that they were actually like cohabbed with like really dominant males,
yeah,
and it just like didn't go well at all. So these geckos come in with actual scars and bite marks from these males that would just attack them out of for like zero reason, and well, I mean, I guess it's to be expected. That's why you don't cohab geckos.
yeah.
But and they were really defensive, and it took a long time for them to get used to being handled and to being around people. And yeah, that's usually the only time I see defensive leopard geckos, though.
I think it's just really, I don't know how you feel, but like I've worked with rescues before when I was younger. Like all of my personal pets were all rescues, and I think it's like really rewarding when you have a very defensive animal and they become to the point where they become start to become sociable and they become comfortable with handling and like they're never I never think that they're 100% in my personal experience, but it's really nice, at least to me, to see them come to a point where they can at least be tolerable with it or comfortable enough with me as a person. Like I just find it fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I've seen animals go through complete transformations. Um, let's see, we had a boa in, well, we still have it in. I don't know if you happened to watch the last reptile road trip video when I picked up a whole bunch of different animals. But
Mhm.
one of those animals was this like giant BCI, and she actually had a really jacked up face because her previous owner, had been building her an enclosure, and he had been building it out of like window replacement glass,
Mm.
which if you're not familiar with that, it's not just glass, but it's actually really fragile glass. It's pretty thin. It's like the cheapest glass you
Yeah.
can get. So it's not tempered, it's not thick, and you have a giant, she's probably 8 or 9 feet boa, and he put her in this enclosure, and she ended up breaking right through the glass and ended up cutting up the top of her head really, really badly, and it was just a really, really gnarly situation. And when I first got her in, he had done virtually nothing to treat it. So it
Oh.
was really infected. Yeah, he had done nothing. It had been like that for a month. He hadn't even washed it. It was disgusting. Um, but when I first got her in, she was actually pretty nice at that point because no one had touched like with her sensitive wounds at all. So she came in and she was a pretty nice, sociable boa.
Mm.
But during the treatment, obviously I need to get in there and clean it and really kind of wash it out. And that was a long process for the first couple months. She was actually bandaged every week and had the bandage changed like twice a week. And it was a very, very long process, and obviously put her in a lot of stress and a lot of discomfort. So
Yeah.
during that time, she actually became a lot more defensive, and I took several bites from her. Which, if you've never been bitten by a 9 foot boa, it's not it's not a corn snake bite.
Yeah.
So she kind of actually became very defensive, became a lot more difficult to work with during that time. And then after that started to heal up, at this point, it's turned into scar tissue now, which is awesome. She just shed like 2 weeks ago, and that shed peeled off the scab, and it revealed a nice forming scar tissue underneath, and it's absolutely phenomenal. But now she's finally starting to actually calm down again and become more sociable. Now that the wound's healing up properly, and her nerve endings are starting to heal, and it's not as sensitive as it used to be.
Yeah, I definitely like I was like gonna ask like before you like continued, I was like, is that the one with like the head injury? Because I remember like I feel like I mean it's understandable that she was defensive, like 100%. Like whereas I don't think they're like dogs and cats in the sense where reptiles always realize that we're helping them. They just kind of think, oh, this is uncomfortable, you
Yes,
know?
exactly. Yep.
Um, but that's really good to hear that like has all of if I'm allowed to ask, have all of the wounds healed up or is it just like only the really big one that has?
No, I mean they're not all 100% still. Like it's still very thin scar tissue. She's going to be with me for at least another 6 months before I consider her good to go. But it's definitely they're all healing up, and there were some other wounds kind of around the side of her face and stuff. Those ones actually healed up a lot faster because they were so much smaller.
Mhm.
So yeah, all her wounds are healing up phenomenally. I'll send you a photo sometime when we're off air. It's really, really cool to see
Oh,
how far she's come.
yeah, I'd love to see that because I've been following her since the original like reptile road trip. So I'd love to see how she's doing. Just because I think it's phenomenal to see the healing ability that snakes or even reptiles in general have, like how they can kind of bounce back from stuff like that. I mean, obviously do proper treatment, but still, like it's just amazing to see, like
Yeah,
how that all works.
yeah.
Um, I don't know, not to I don't know why that guy made it such thin glass because BCIs, from my experience, because I've been bitten by a BCI, so I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
They're very, 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 very like strong and very like
Yes.
out there. So I don't know, maybe I don't know. That just seems crazy to me to make it with something not like plexiglass or like even something thicker because they're so strong and like BCIs
Yeah.
are very, in my experience, I've never owned one, but I knew people who owned them, very curious and very exploring, and I feel like if they can find a way to get out, they will try. Like,
Yeah, I've worked with replacement glass before on a rat snake build that I did ages and ages ago, and I
yeah.
will never go back to replacement glass. It is so fragile. Like for a rat snake, it would be fine, but something like a full grown boa. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, she also came into me pretty obese. Like she wasn't the proper square that you're supposed to have in a boa. She was like a circle. She looked like a ball python. It
Oh
was
no.
absolutely ridiculous. So she was really obese too. So when you're that heavy, all it takes is like literally just leaning against the glass for it to
To
shatter. And
yeah.
yeah.
I was going to ask you, do you like with a lot of your rescues, have you noticed, because I feel like with him he didn't really warn you or tell you like the condition that she was in. Do you run into that a lot with like people not telling you the actual condition of the animal and you don't really know till you get them? Or do people tend to be upfront? Like I always wondered that.
So yeah, it depends on the person. Usually, if somebody approaches me directly, usually they're really upfront about everything. But sometimes people like approach me through a reference, right? Like they were talking to one of their friends, and their friend said, "Oh, you should check out this guy. He can take in one of your animals or
Yeah.
whatever." So it depends on the situation. I This guy, I don't know if he was intentionally not upfront or not. He did send me a photo. It was a really blurry photo, and I could not make it out at all. Like there was no way I could have been able to tell that it was as bad as it was.
Yeah.
But I knew that there was a risk that it was really bad, so I was going in at least with the worst case scenario expectations, and it happened to be pretty much maybe not worst case scenario, but it was pretty bad. It certainly could have been a better situation. But I'm ready to take on new animals. I always enjoy a challenge like that, so it wasn't an issue at all.
If you could, if you don't mind me asking, what would be you, in your opinion, like the hardest like rehabilitation case you've worked with so far?
Honestly, it might be the one I'm telling you about. Um,
Really? Okay.
so the thing with her, I've been calling her Olga, is her name. Um, so the thing with Olga is that, especially when she first came in, treatment with her was so difficult because like she is just as strong, if not stronger than me, right? So
Yeah.
when I'm needing to fight her, if she's not taking well to being worked with, right? That's a battle. It's not just like, oh, I'm sorry, this is stressful for you, but like it needs to happen. It's like, no, I need to fight this animal, yeah, in order to
Yeah.
treat it properly. And that was extremely challenging to work with, especially so. Just to kind of walk you through kind of how I went about cleaning her wound and treating it. When I first got it in, I kind of needed to like completely scrape it clean because there
Ugh.
was dirt in there. There was substrate. There was scabs. There was holes. Like it was just disgusting. And so I needed to get in there. I needed to kind of scrape it clean, and then I washed it out with a saline solution. Which I don't know
Mhm.
if you're familiar at all with, like veterinary practices, but saline
Yeah,
solution is
yeah.
often used to wash out wounds and stuff like that. So, and obviously that stung for her a little bit, and then it would then I applied antibiotics, and for the first like 2 or 3 weeks, I don't remember. I have the exact dates written down somewhere, but for the first couple of weeks, I actually had it completely bandaged to really make sure that antibiotic stayed in there and didn't go anywhere. So there was two
Yeah.
different layers of bandages that went around her head, and I wasn't quite able to get all the way down her nose, obviously, because I wasn't going to bandage her mouth shut. But
Yeah.
it was worse on her neck anyway, so that's where the majority of the bandage went, and obviously getting that on was a challenge. So
Oh.
when I'm doing this, I'm needing to hold this animal down as she's moving and extremely strong and not afraid to bite as well. So it was just a real challenge. The procedures themselves were relatively straightforward, but just working with an animal that's as large as she was, especially when you're working on your own, can always be a big challenge. So
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Just like in my personal experience, like I can't imagine getting repeatedly bit by a huge boa like that. Like I said, I've been bitten by a BCI. I've also been bitten by a berm, and those
wow.
hurt. Yeah, that like just one of those. I was like, ooh, that. And I got bruising when I got bit by the BCI. I don't know if you experienced bruising, but I did. Um, so
How'd you
I
get bit
can't.
by a berm? That sounds like an interesting story.
So fun story. I won't say their name, but there is a shop in my area that they call themselves a zoo. Give it that
Mm.
much, but they basically have this like meet and greet like photo shoot thing, and I was with like I'm just glad it was me that got bit. And they have this area where you can like hold animals and hold like a berm and like take pictures, yada yada yada. Um, and I was with like my partner and my partner's little brother, and my partner's little brother really wanted to take a picture with the berm, and like I could tell, like in my opinion, like I don't own a snake, but I could tell something was off. Like the snake seemed very agitated to me and was in a very much an S curve, and like I mentioned it to the person beforehand. I was like, because sometimes like BCIs can take that pose but not mean any like threat. That's just them exploring it. But I like, to me, I read that as a warning sign, and I like talked to them before, and they're like, oh no, like she just does that, you're fine, it's fine. And I was like, okay. So they had me near the head of the animal, and I saw the berm like rear back, and I was like, it's over, it's done. And she leaned over and like really quickly just striped my arm, like full on, like my forearm, just yep, and then let go. And I was like, and I looked at the person, and I like was kind of, I started handling her in a way where she couldn't get to like my partner's little brother, because he's like 7. I don't want him to just, go through what I went through.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there like in pain. And the person, like, I don't think they were trained properly for that to happen, because they just full on panicked. And they were like, oh my God, like, I don't know what to do. Like, they like started like walking for like backup. I was like, you just need to grab her. Like, it's
What a
okay. Like,
mess.
yeah, and like I mean, like they were super nice about it. Like I mean, obviously it wasn't my fault. I don't blame the snake either, because like my personal opinion, you shouldn't have a snake being handled by multiple different people multiple times a day. But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean that's super stressful for an animal.
Yeah.
And if you have like designated animals that are kind of for that purpose, you want to like cycle through like 5 or 6 throughout the day, like maybe do that. And I certainly wouldn't do that with an animal that's as big and has the potential that a berm has. I mean, they get large.
Dude.
They're not puppy dogs.
No, and then like they were like, "Oh my God, she's usually so sweet. Like we don't know why that happened." And in my head, like not to be rude, but I was kind of thinking like, I know why it happened. Like,
Yeah,
like but that one was gnarly. I mean, the initial bite, like I've been bitten stuff with stuff by like ball pythons, whatever. Like I've been bitten by a ball python, whatever. That's literally whatever. But
yeah,
that one, like I was thinking, I was like, oh, because I'd never been bitten by a big snake before, because I've never owned a big snake. I was like, oh, that really hurt. Like it's gonna go away, and it wasn't like as painful as the initial bite, but it was definitely sore like afterwards. And I don't think that's from the bite itself. I think it's just because of the full force of the weight of a berm, like, you know, going
sure.
off. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's my story. Like, I've never worked with berms. I just got bit by one. Like, that's what I always tell people. I'm like, yeah, I've been bitten by a berm. The BCI, my uncle used to own one, and she was super like feeding. Like, she's passed away now. She lived like a good 30 years. So it's like she just
Nice.
lived her life, but she was very food responsive.
Okay. Yeah.
And basically I was a little kid, and I didn't really like, it was like I always knew how to handle her, but we had like a special thing that was like we put in before we started handling her, so she knew that it wasn't like feeding time.
Sure.
And I forgot to hold that up, because like like little kids do, you're excited, and she didn't realize, and like I reached my hand in, and she like just really quickly like food response bit, and like started rapping. And once she realized, like I mean obviously I, like a little 8-year-old was panicking, but I mean once she realized, I wasn't food, it wasn't as big of a deal. I still love that snake. I loved that snake. Like, and I never held resentment against it. Like my mom's terrified of snakes, and if anything, it made me fall in love with them even more as animals, just because I thought it was cool.
Yeah, well, that's great because there's many people that would not have had that kind of reaction to that sort of an experience, especially a food bite. Like a food response bite is almost always worse than a defensive bite. So I'm not surprised you got bruising from something like that.
Oh
That's brutal.
yeah, I mean like I said, she was like a really docile snake usually, just super food, like not aggressive, but more like, I don't know how you would say it, like ready for food. Like she was very
Yeah, food aggressive is the term I would
just
use.
hungry naturally. Yeah, so like but like she was very like super, like once you got her out, or like she knew it wasn't feeding time, super chill. I just,
Sure.
little kid, didn't take the proper, like measurements to go. But like I mean my uncle just uncoiled her and like used the credit card technique to like pop her teeth out. It was fine after that. Like we never had another issue with her.
Nice.
I miss her like all the time because she was
Mm.
rad, dude.
Yeah,
But
that's cool.
my uncle like had her like from the 80s, like so she like died I think around 2010s, so like 30 years, you know.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Yeah, but she was rad. But yeah, like that when you were saying like you were repeatedly getting bitten by a BCI, I'm like, oh, like
Well, then again, the nice thing is they weren't food bites, so it was a bite and release, much more like your Berm story than your
yeah.
BCI story. She never tried to coil around me or anything because that's basically something they reserve for their food, right? People are always like, "Oh, aren't you afraid your snake's gonna strangle you?" I'm like, snakes don't strangle things that they only strangle things they're trying to eat. Like my snake would never strangle me. I'm not
Yeah,
a food source.
I think people run into that fear a lot because like for me, like I just don't have the spacing and like personal reasons I don't own snakes right now, but like people always like when I'm like I think one day I would really like to own a BCI if like the stars align, and like my mom is literally terrified. Like I don't know if you run into that, but my mom is literally terrified of me owning one because she's like they're gonna strangle you, and I just think that's like such a negative like myth surrounding like snakes like that. Even ball pythons, like my mom was like that thing could strangle you. I'm like it's a ball python, it's not going to do anything.
So yeah, I mean, I always tell people like when they ask like, "Oh, like could your snake strangle you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, technically, it technically has like the muscle mass to do something like that, but where's the motivation, right? Just like in a criminal case, it's not just the ability to do something. You also need a motivation to do something. And snakes only strangle things they're trying to eat. So I'm not really in any sort of risk or danger here. As far as my mother, kind of adjusting to reptiles, it's definitely been a long road for both my parents. I'm very proud of them for how far they've gone. When I was little, let's say I caught my first snake when I was 7 years old, and that was one I caught outside. I didn't keep it or anything, but that was my first like hands-on experience with the snake. It was a 5 foot California king snake, absolutely
Oh,
stunning animal.
oh wow.
Yeah, I have some great memories of that. And from that moment on, my parents knew that I was gonna be one of those kids. And so when I was 10, I got my first bearded dragon, which I have very fond memories of him. His name was Drake. Um, I got him when he was already pretty old, and he lived for maybe 6 or 7 years more with me, which I definitely have some very fond memories of him. And I wasn't actually able to get a pet snake of my own until 2016, which is just like 4 years ago now.
Oh
And
wow.
now here I am with a bazillion snakes, and I'm still living at home. I'm just a little bit over 19 years old, still living at home for now. I'll probably be moving out come fall because we'll be going to NC State University, study
Okay.
zoology. But I am still living at home right now, and my parents are totally cool with me having a whole bunch of snakes from various sizes in my bedroom, which I'm very thankful for them. They've allowed my interest in these animals to grow and flourish, and that's definitely something I give them a lot of credit for because not every parent would be okay with that.
Yeah, no. Are you a 2000s baby? Can I
I
ask that?
am, yes.
Oh, so am I. Okay.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
What month? I'm
Dec-
May. So
December.
December. Okay, okay. So you're like a late 2000s baby.
Yep, very late, very late. I was on the cusp.
Yeah,
Yep.
gotcha, gotcha. No, but like what you were saying about your parents, yeah, it's been a process, especially with me because I want to personally work into breeding, and I want to be like I mean I understand rack systems for breeders, but I want to be one that maybe does full size enclosures. Like I don't
Yeah, I like that.
necessarily want to do racks. I mean obviously for hatchlings, I personally think like for like the first 2 weeks keeping them like in a rack system just to make sure everything's okay and like they're in a decent sized space where you can check, like I think that's fine, but I would definitely like personally I've made like I'm working on a few gecko bookshelves for when I do start breeding, like they can all have their own little enclosure space because I'm a very small time. But I think
Sure,
even for my family, like my mom, like with my crested geckos and my leopard geckos, like it was a bit of a struggle for her at first.
sure,
Because sometimes like it was just more like I'd get her used to it. So like when I'd have to do like a deep cage clean, I would have her come sit with me in my room and I'd be like, okay, like you're gonna hold one. And like that would panic her, but I'm like, you're gonna hold one and it's gonna be okay. And she now like she comes in and she wants to hold one, so it's been a really fun process to watch for my mom being like utterly terrified, like just scared of being bitten, and I was like, it's a leopard gecko. Like she's not gonna bite you. Um, and she doesn't understand like sometimes how I do it because I just have one that's very defensive, and I just think it's just because it's a baby, so I think that's
Sure.
why. But she is like she's seen me get bit, and she like used to freak out, and I'm like, I'm not even bleeding, like it's okay.
That's
um
funny.
my dad's the complete opposite. My dad did stuff similar to where you did, where like I think back in the 80s, like he went on this mountain trip, and but like he was like 7 or 8, and he brought home a bag of snakes,
Nice.
and they all got out in the house, in like my grandparents' house, and like yeah, and so like for months they were finding like garter snakes and king snakes just randomly in places. Um, but yeah, so my dad's very different. Like he super cool with all my animals. Like he I think himself would probably own a huge snake if my mom would let him, but she's not at that point yet. But yeah, so
Yeah,
like I definitely relate to what you were saying. Um,
yeah, that's funny. My mom's not a huge fan of any of the snakes. She
mm,
tolerates them, but she doesn't never holds them or anything. But she always loves all the turtles, and she'll always like come in and be like, "Are you feeding your turtles enough? Like it looks like it'll eat more." I'm like, "Mother, if you feed a turtle everything it'll eat, your turtles can become obese. Like that's that's not how they work. You shouldn't feed your turtle every time it will eat food."
yeah, no, like my mom's very similar with like my leopard geckos because like I have some that are very food responsive and want to eat like every single day, and it's like you can't do that with
Yep.
adults. And like she'll be like, "Look, like Jack's one that he's very you know Jack, he's very like food
Yeah.
ready. Like he's very food ready. Like sometimes I'll just see him and he's next to his bowl and he's looking at me and I'm like, "No, it's not time." And like my mom will see him and she's like, look at him, he's starving. I'm like, he's not starving. He'll just eat whatever I give him. If I gave him like 20 waxworms, he'd still be hungry. Like he'll
Yep.
just eat. They'll just eat. They don't like
And
even
many
they don't.
reptiles are like that because they're in the wild. They're opportunistic hunters, right? So they don't know when their next meal is going to come. So they're literally hardwired to eat whenever food is available because there might be like a month and a half when they don't have any food and they need to be able to store up that energy. But in captivity, when we can ration it out and actually have them eating consistently, for every week or however often it is that your animal's feeding, we need to be careful that we're not keying into that opportunistic instinct that these reptiles have. Otherwise, we're going to end up with very unhealthy animals.
Obese.
Yep.
Obese animals. Yeah, I've definitely seen some very, very obese leopard geckos to the point where I'm like, is this enough? Like, I don't know. Like I don't know if you're aware of this, but on Instagram there's this whole like it's mainly in the Asian countries, but they have this whole thing where the bigger the animal is, the cuter it is, and it's just scary how big some leopard geckos get. Like I'm like, wow. Like there's
I
one
mean,
account.
don't some people feed their leopard geckos like pinkies and stuff?
Yes. I know people that'll feed their crested geckos pinkies
Oh
before
my
breeding
gosh.
season, and I'm like, why? Like, I mean, I get like calcium boosting, but you can literally get like just straight liquid calcium and mix it in with their food, like if that's what you want to do, or you want them to bulk up like insects. And then like I'm honestly curious how they even get a crest eat a pinky, because most cresteds that I've worked with, once they hit like adulthood, they lose their interest in insects. Like they don't really want them as much as like juveniles do.
Hmm.
Juveniles really like insects, and then it's very
Interesting.
normal for when a crested gecko becomes an adult, just because in the wild they become more herbivores almost. I mean, they technically, like you said, they're opportunistic. So if there's a bug, they're not gonna turn it away. But I think because in captivity they always have like food cups and stuff like that with like Pangea or Rapashi or whatever, they're
Hmm.
constantly sustained. So I don't think adults really, and from what I've read and from my personal experience, they don't really like bugs anymore. Because I had a juvenile. I've had one that I raised from like 2 months up until he's going to be two, and he literally just he like as a like juvenile was super hunter, like wanted to eat every bug he could, like. And then when he hit about a year and a half, like he just lost that interest. And it's not like I mean, a lot of people freak out, but if your crested gecko stops eating bugs, they're going to be fine as long as you're feeding a meal replacement. Like they're still getting their nutrients, but
Yep.
um that like that's why you were saying like pinkies, like I don't know like how you even because crested geckos aren't like even when they're full size, they're not that big. Um,
Yeah, not at all.
like the biggest one I have is one of my males, and he's like 55 grams, and
Oh
that's
wow,
nothing.
that is a small gecko.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's considered a big boy. Like he's considered big for a male, and even
Sorry,
him, like
sorry. Did you say crested gecko or leopard gecko?
crested gecko.
Okay, yeah, 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 I gotcha.
Yeah,
I follow.
yeah, no, you're good. I just can't imagine him like eating a pinky, like or wanting to. Like so,
Yeah,
I don't know how they like other than like assist feeding or like something. I don't know how they could get them to eat that because they don't even have the teeth or anything to really break it down like a monitor would or even like a tegu or something like that. So I don't know. That's
yeah.
my point. I don't
I mean, they can chew a little bit,
know.
but I still, yeah, it's obviously. So I'm big into Pac-Man frogs, right? And so I'm a very big advocate of like not feeding too many rodents because so many people feed their like frogs exclusively rodents, or they get one rodent a week, and that's like way too much. If you want to do it as like an occasional treat every 2 months, this is my opinion. Is if you want to do an occasional treat every 2 months for something like your Pac-Man frog, that might be okay, but you should not be feeding your animal like exclusively rodents because we've actually seen that in animals, especially like Pac-Man frogs, where they're fed exclusively rodents, their lifespan is actually a lot shorter because their body needs to metabolize all that fat, and it can cause like circulatory issues, like cardiac issues in people. It can cause all sorts of other health issues, and actually ends up decreasing the lifespan of the animal when you feed them too many rodents. So I'm always a big advocate of, and you honestly don't even need to feed your Pac-Man frog rodents. You really don't. You can feed a Pac-Man frog completely healthily on like night crawlers and dubia roaches, and your Pac-Man frog will be perfectly fine. But people just love to see their animals eat rodents because it's a cool frog thing to do. So it just it drives me nuts.
Do the Pac-Man frogs get something similar to like leopard geckos when they get like super obese? Is it like fatty liver disease? Do they get that
It
somewhat?
could be. I don't actually know too much about what's going on the internal spectrum of that, but the biggest thing I've seen is that when they just get too much fat in their system, right, their body's trying to metabolize all that. So wherever the issue ends up arising, it all comes from the fact that their body's having to metabolize all this fat. And then another area that we see this in is I'm sure you're familiar with the phenomenon of like power feeding, right? You
Yeah,
feed your animal too much when they're young, so they
yeah,
get bigger a lot quicker. Well, that actually also takes away some of their lifespan because if they reach adult age sooner, then their body, it goes into an adult, cycle of metabolism, so it actually
yeah.
finishes the complete life cycle a whole lot faster. And that's another big issue with Pac-Man frogs, right? If you feed your frog, like rodents every day when it's a tiny little frog, it's going to grow really fast and then have all sorts of other issues as well. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for not feeding rodents to Pac-Man frogs, and if you do, just do it very rarely, very occasionally. My main Pac-Man frog, Eliza, she's like, let's see, I got her in 2016, so she's 4 or 5 years old now. No, was it 2016 or 2015? I don't know. I've had her for a good little while already.
Yeah.
And like if you look at online care guides, they say they live like 5 to 10 years. I think that's absolute bogus. I think they live 5 to 10 years if people like are feeding them like
Rodents.
junk. Yeah, then maybe they'll live 5 to 10 years. But she has shown no signs of slowing down. She seems still very youthful, and she's approaching that 5 year mark. My goal is to take her to 15 years. So we'll see. We'll see where I'm at in
Hopefully.
another 5 years. But so far she's doing absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I was gonna say like power feeding is it's a big issue in breeding leopard geckos because like not there are good ethical breeders, but there are definitely some that power feed younger animals. Like I'm not sure how familiar with morphs you are, but like snows are just naturally known to be slow growing leopard geckos, snow leopard geckos.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're just naturally known to be very slow growers, and I've definitely seen people like power feed them. I also don't agree with like I know some people like there's a whole like 10 to 15-minute rule I've seen with like leopard geckos, and I personally like I don't know about you, but I don't follow that 10 to 15-minute rule. It depends on the animal because I definitely know some of mine could eat like 20 plus bugs in a sitting in 10 to 15 minutes, and I just feel like
Oh yeah.
that's not
I don't follow that at
necessarily
all.
Yeah, like I don't follow even with babies personally, I don't follow that. Like they need to eat every day, but if they're eating like if you're following that 10 to 15-minute rule, they could if they're very food ready, they could eat like up to 20 bugs a day, and that's just not healthy for like
No.
any animal. And I don't know, like I just see a lot of people like a lot of misinformation, and it just boggles me how we still have stuff like that in the community with that 10 to 15-minute rule. Like I don't know, like I just it boggles my mind.
Well, some people say that you can feed leopard geckos ad libitum, which I don't think is true. Like that's even worse than the 10 to 15-minute rule. There's people that said like, "Oh, just always make sure there's like 3 or 4 insects in their food bowl and they'll be fine." And I'm like, "No, like it'll just keep on eating food."
Yeah, they're not like us where they're like, okay, I'm full, I'm gonna go away. They're gonna keep thinking like, because in their head, like you have to think they're like, okay, food's coming now, but like maybe it won't come tomorrow. Like that's just
Exactly.
how they think. And yeah, I've seen accounts that just keep like 30 like mealworms in a dish in their enclosure, and I'm like, no, what are you doing? Like that's they don't need that much. Like
That's funny.
and, like I like it. I don't know how it is on YouTube. For like from what I've seen, most people who work with reptiles, for the most part, not everyone, is pretty good with their knowledge. But on Instagram, like you'd be surprised by the community and how unknowledge some people are. Like it's insane to me. Like they run pet accounts and they don't even know like certain things. And like I don't know if you deal with this, but you run into a lot of toxic people on Instagram who are only doing it for the like views or like clicks or people to like gain followers. They run accounts to do that, and like that's very scary to me. I don't know if that happens a lot on YouTube.
Oh yeah. Did you ever hear about Oh, I guess that's a name drop. Never mind. Let me not do that. But there was this channel. You may have heard about this phenomenon. It was a while back, but it was basically a channel where he had all his animals just kind of loose in like a giant bioactive bedroom, and it was not a good thing. It was really bad.
I never heard of that. You're gonna have to tell me like once we stop filming because
Yeah,
I
yeah, definitely.
I never that were they all like different species?
Oh yeah, from
'Cause
all over the world. He had like leopard geckos and bearded dragons and like snakes and boas and just everything just like living in a giant room.
that's just asking for trouble.
Oh yeah, I mean, and what he would do is he would have like a desert corner and then like a rainforest corner, but there was no barriers. Everyone was just running around, and he would just like dump like 1,000 insects in the middle of the room, like every week or whatever. And it was not a great thing that was
I
going
don't.
on.
How do you even? What?
I don't know.
Like I'm just sitting here in shock. Like I'm like, why would you?
Oh yeah, it's bad on YouTube. There's definitely some bad characters, as there have been in the past for sure. It's funny. Sometimes
Uh,
all you can do is laugh.
yeah, like no, like I've definitely like on a previous episode like we were talking about like me and my friends were talking about like problematic morphs in the community like silkies and stuff, and
Okay,
like all you can
yes,
do is like laugh. You're like, why do you like keep doing stuff that's like even like harmful to creating something like that, or like stuff like with on Instagram. I've definitely run into people that are very like fame hungry, which if you're doing this, you it's a very niche thing. You shouldn't be looking into it to get popular in my opinion. Like there's
yep,
much different things you can do. Like I ran into a girl who would constantly hold her snakes in shed for pictures, or she would hold them in I don't know if I'm sure you know this, but you can't hold a snake in a certain way from its back without, or like it's a position in a way where it could like break the snake's ribs. I don't know how to describe, but it's a way like
yikes,
you're not supposed to hold the snake because like it could break their ribs. And someone who was an exotics vet, like one of my friends, like reached out to her and was like, "Hey, like you really shouldn't be holding your snakes in shed or holding them like that. Like their ribs could be broken. Like I just don't want you to like run into any problems." And this like girl literally responded like, "Oh, well, I can't break my theme because then I could lose followers and then I could get less likes, and that's just not worth it to me."
that's funny.
Yeah, and you'll run into a lot of people like that, or people who I think there's a very big difference between having a big collection and animal hoarding.
Sure,
And
yeah.
you'll see people get like 12 to 10 animals in like a 2 to 3 month span, and you're like, "Oh, what are you doing?"
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, bringing up this the topic of like animal hoarding versus large collections, that's something I always strive to do, and I think the where I always draw the line is like I'm never gonna get an animal just to get an animal. Like that's when I think of animal hoarding, that's what I think of. People that say like go to a reptile expo and see a species that they don't have and say, oh, I'm gonna get this just because I don't have any of these yet. Like I when I go, if I'm gonna get a personal pet for me, like it's gonna be like this is something I'm really interested in and I'm really looking forward to working with it. Not just I don't have this before, let me add it to the collection of animals that I never spend time with. And that's kind of how I draw that distinction. There's some people that are very high functioning and have a bunch of time on their hands or whatever, and they're able to have a whole bunch of animals that they're like able to enjoy and able to work with. And hey, that's great. Like as long as you're able to provide that for the animal. But if you're not even enjoying all the animals that you have, why do you even have them? Like just don't. Like it's not worth it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that problem on YouTube a lot with a lot of people having like 100 plus animals and like they're kept in like bin racks and stuff and like I'm just like at this point like are you even like hanging out with every single one of them?
Yep.
Like are you just doing it like it just like there's a very like fine line like for me as like wanting to be a small time breeder I think I have right now like 11 animals in total but like I have time for like every single one of them. It's not like I'm like
Yep.
oh you know we'll wait 3 weeks before I like see you like it's and I think people don't realize like how much maintenance goes into like having a bigger collection. I'm sure you know because you even work with like rescue so I'm sure like even what's not in your personal collection, like it takes a lot of time, I would
Oh yeah.
assume.
Yeah, so generally, like on a very full month, I might have upwards of 100 animals in at a time. But
Hmm.
I only have, I think around a dozen personal pets, and those are just animals that are just mine. And those are only animals that I really, 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 really love and really enjoy hanging out with. And then the rest of the animals, they get all their care, but they don't necessarily get as much just like hanging out time, which is fine because I'm not their forever home, so I don't like feel bad about that or anything.
Hmm.
But if I was like just like imagining if all the animals that we had in were like all my personal pets, I would never have time to like actually interact with all of them or actually get fulfillment from keeping this many animals. It's way too confusing and complicated for me to like imagine keeping them as personal pets. Like that would just be insane. So yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, like I like kudos to you because like as a college student, like I can't even imagine doing something like that. Like I definitely want to do smaller scale rescue and rehabilitation one day, but like how you do it, like I just think that's amazing at 19 to be able to like find the time for everything. I'm sure like I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm sure have there been times where you've had to turn animals away just because you didn't have the space or the time?
Yeah, typically the animals I need to turn away are honestly the most common thing I need to turn away is turtles because turtles require a lot of gallonage to swim and they're really hard to find homes for. And I know it sounds bad this way, like when I say this, like I turn away animals that I struggle to find homes for. But if I took in every single red-eared slider that people brought to me, like I would have like 25 red-eared sliders and like not be able like I'd rehome like one every 2 months or something and then I wouldn't be able to like rehome any of these other animals. So it would be a net negative as far as like what I'm giving to the reptile community if I were able to work with like all the animals that people brought to me, if that makes sense.
No, I can imagine, like especially with turtles, because I feel like are those like a lot of like common people that reach out to you? What is like the most common species people reach out to you with?
So I get a lot of turtles. Probably the most common one is either leopard geckos or bearded dragons.
Hmm.
We get a ton of those, and I think we have like 15 or 16 leopard geckos in right now. So we have a good chunk of them in at this point. And then bearded dragons, I only have a few in right now, but I do often get a lot of those. I think I have one coming in from New Jersey next week,
Hmm.
which will be fun. And then I think I have a few others on the horizon. But those are probably the most common that I get in, I think.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, I was gonna feel like the more common, like, pets, like leopard geckos, you were saying, or bearded, or like stuff like red-eared sliders, because, like, I feel like those are what you'll see at pet stores, and I feel like a lot of people buy them without really knowing their care requirements or stuff like that, because they
Yeah.
just bought them because pet stores aren't the best at
No, I mean it. I've
selling.
seen a good pet store before, but the majority of them are not the best. That's 100% correct.
Yeah, I've
Um,
I've seen like good reptile based ones, but I was more talking like Petco and PetSmart. Like I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people purchase from there.
Yep.
And I feel like that's just not, and that's, I don't know, like, I don't know, like you personally, but I feel like a lot of people just buy animals and then realize they're kind of in over their head because they didn't do the research. And I feel like that would cause a lot of rehoming situations. I don't know if that's what it is usually, but.
So usually what I find is that people that buy stuff from Petco don't actually realize they're in over their head. They just get bored of it. So like the
Okay.
majority of the rehomes I get, if it originally came from like a Petco or PetSmart, they usually never went on to actually do any proper research. Then most of the time they just like get bored of the animal and then like seek to rehome it like 2 years later after they've already messed up this animal. Well, it's not fair to say they've messed up the animal. I'm sure PetSmart wasn't caring for them the best anyways. Um, but
Yeah.
that's usually the most common situation I get. Or if someone moves off to college, they just leave it with their mom, and then their mom gets like cares for it for like 2 months. Is like, I'm not doing this anymore, and then they end up rehoming it. So those are probably the most common ways that I end up getting reptiles in.
Hmm. I wanted to ask about actually like a couple animals on your site, if that's okay with you, that
Sure.
you have listed right now. Because there's like one that I've like fallen in love with, and you can like literally, if you ever ask my partner, like he will tell you that I never shut up about the one leopard gecko you have that's like the super platinum female.
Yeah.
I was curious like her story because like I'm in love with her. Like I keep seeing pictures of her, and I'm like, oh, like
Yeah.
she. So like, what's her story? Like, I just want to ask a couple of their
Yeah.
stories.
Of course. Yeah. So let's see. There was somebody that lived maybe 35 minutes away. He had a larger collection. He was a really young kid, maybe late middle school, early high school, and
Uh-huh.
he had a pretty large collection. And I think he just like came to the response. So this guy was in middle school, early high school, and I guess he had just kind of collected a lot of animals when he was really young, and then came to the responsible conclusion that he just kind of had too many, and he wasn't really enjoying all of them. So he reached out to me and rehomed quite a few different animals to me. I think it was a corn snake, the platinum leopard gecko, and the oxalotl that we had in a while back. Um, so I got three really nice animals out of him. They were very well cared for. He definitely knew what he was doing.
Mhm.
So they all came to me in really great condition, and I've actually hung on to her for quite a bit longer. For a little bit, I was thinking about breeding her just because she's a really stunning animal. But I
Mhm.
decided I'd just go ahead and let her go. There was no good males that came in that would be good partners for her. So I decided just to let her go, and then she got listed on the site maybe a week ago. So yeah, that's her story.
Yeah.
She didn't have any health issues when she came in. Has always been a great eater. Um, really sociable, really sweet little gal. Really pretty eyes.
Yeah, like I've seen her like when you released the new list and I like saw her and I was like, "Oh, like she's so pretty." Like but definitely I was curious about like do you have any like rescues on the site right now that have been like
Yeah.
rescued?
So the two rescues that we have up on the site right now are a pair of Tremper albino, I think they are. Tremper or Bell, I don't remember. Leopard geckos. They're both females. They might be minorly stunted. They're a little bit smaller than an average adult leopard gecko.
Mhm.
And they both came from abusive households. They both actually came from the same household. They were housed in a 5.5 gallon with two males.
Oh.
Um,
Mm.
which not great. I actually found them for sale on Craigslist,
I was gonna
and
figure that. Mm.
yeah, that was a sad day. Oh, and there was also a toad in that enclosure as well.
There was a I'm sorry, like I went silent, but how
Yep,
how do
it
they
was it was a wreck.
even it but how does the toad surviving in there? Like I don't
Well,
know what kind of toad was this? Like
it was just an American toad, something they had found outside. And they
what?
had it set up like
Oh,
sort of like a weird polydarium. So there was like it was like filled with gravel, and then there was like a dugout in the gravel with a little bit of water, and that's where the toad was chilling. It was really pathetic.
how
Um, it was one of the worst
and this is
enclosures I've
like a
ever seen.
5 gallon, right?
5.5, yeah.
Oh my god.
It was bad.
There and
Four leopard geckos and a toad.
yeah, just how do you in like my opinion, like how how do you like sustain life in there? Like, and especially to bring something from outside to like your and put it in an enclosure with other animals, which you shouldn't be even doing anyway. Like, you run the risk of so many parasites and
Oh
like,
yeah. I mean, not only that, to me the bigger issue is that the I don't know about bigger, but a big issue is that the requirements for a toad are
are
nothing
very
like the
different.
requirements for a leopard gecko. Like they're not even similar. They
No,
come
that's
from different continents. Like,
that's
come
why
on.
no, that's why I was literally like a toad, like a toad. Like we're talking a toad right now, because
So yeah, in this situation, I kind of blame the parents. I think it was like the kids. I think their one of their cousins gave them like their four leopard geckos, and then the kids were, they were really little kids. They didn't really know what they were doing, and their mother just kind of let them do whatever they wanted. And then they found a toad in their backyard, and they're like, "Oh, let's add this to the enclosure. They can be friends." And in some ways, it was innocent. Like the kids didn't realize what they were doing is bad. So I kind of put the blame in that case on the mother because if you're like we don't hold kids accountable for anything else they do. It's why kids don't go to jail, right? So the responsibility falls on you, the mother, to like make sure that your kids are, if they're working with living animals, that they know what they're doing and they're doing their research and keeping their animals properly cared for.
or like
So
even
yeah.
you as a parent, like I feel like should know like the proper research. Like,
Oh yeah, well, one or the other. I mean, my mother doesn't really know. Like even when I was, 12 or 11 or whatever, when I first had my animals, she didn't necessarily do a ton of research into the animals I worked with, but she could tell that I was, looking into it and understanding what was going on because I cared a lot, right? And she was able to see that, so she didn't necessarily need to monitor everything else beyond that. But if your kid isn't doing that, you should be aware of that, and then it's your job to either say, okay, kid, you need to rehome this animal, or you need to, like figure something out, one or the other. You can't just keep animals in bad conditions. And I don't remember why they ended up needing to or ended up choosing to rehome them, but maybe the kids got bored of it or something. I don't really know what was going on, but yeah, that was. So, anyways, yes, you were asking about those two leopard geckos. I named
yeah.
them Tori and Shelby. They're both young. I think one of them has a few scars on her back, but most of their wounds healed up pretty well. They were with
Hmm.
two other males, which was not good. Um, the actually one of the males I got, he came into me in really really bad condition, and I actually found someone local who was willing to take him in after he healed up,
Uh-huh.
which was great. So I didn't even need to ship him out, which was phenomenal. Um, and then the dominant male surprisingly didn't have like any scars or anything on him. He was like he looked like in great condition. He was like a good weight and everything. Like if I didn't know any better, I would have guessed he had come from like a nice little setup because he was getting
Probably
all the
because he was
food.
the dominant one, yeah.
Yep, he was getting all the food. No one was giving him a hard time. And then the other three were both underweight and had scars on them when they came in. But both Tori and Shelby have healed up great and they've gained weight. They have nice puffy tails again now, and they're ready for their new homes. So you can check them out at radiantreptilia.com/rescues if any of you listeners would like to take a look.
Yeah, like I'm still not over the whole toad thing.
It was bad.
I'm surprised they're lucky that because I don't know how old the two rescues are, but leopard geckos, if they're kept in that condition, they can be bred very, very young before they're ready. So I'm surprised that one of them didn't end up gravid or anything. And especially if they came in underweight, I can't even imagine what that would have done to their body. Like
Yeah,
they're they're just
I
lucky.
Yeah, I'm surprisingly none of actually no, the male that was in really bad condition, he had a regen tail, but the other ones didn't. They both have their original tails, which is pretty cool. But my most recent rescue, which is not up on the site yet, she's still in quarantine, but she is a really nice looking leopard gecko, a bell albino, but she has a completely regenerated tail.
Mm.
Um, and apparently, I wasn't with her for this time, but her previous owner, she seemed like she really cared and knew what she was doing. But she had rescued him originally from somebody else who'd been keeping her with a male like full time, and she ended
Mm.
up egg bound, I guess, and that was a whole procedure that she had to go through like a year ago or whatever. And now that she was all healed up, this person was ready to rehome her, so she reached out to me, and that's how I ended up getting that leopard gecko in. Um, but yeah, I mean that's always a risk, especially if you keep an animal with a male full time. You're not just going to end up with eggs, but you could end up with like being egg bound, just because there's other stresses and other things that can induce uh, those kinds of issues.
I like people who. because like cohabiting is wrong completely, and like even if you didn't know that, like I feel like logic would tell you not to put a male and a female of anything together
Well, some
because
people don't even know how to sex their animals, right?
well that's true,
If you're
yeah.
super uneducated, you don't even realize that there's like a visible difference. So they just think they're throwing four animals together, and they don't even think about the repercussions.
I just I I I like that's all I can say is
Yeah,
because
that's a fair response.
you can see stuff on Craigslist that's just appalling. I
Oh yeah.
I I've definitely gone on there before. Because like with my Instagram and stuff, I definitely try to like if for stuff in my area promote stuff that's on Craigslist that needs to be like rehomed or rescued. Um and it's just insane. Like I've seen 6 leopard geckos on sand housed in a 5 gallon and with like one hide and an overhead lamp, and that's
But
it.
was it a
That's
humid hide? That's the question. Oh
honestly, I
man.
don't even know what it was. It was like this weird, like you know those coconuts, like the
Yeah, I
coconut.
love the little coconut hides. Those are my
Yeah,
favorite.
it was just one of those, but for six full
Nice.
adults, and I was like, and they were like, and for people who don't know, and I feel like it's not a common known thing unless you keep leopard geckos, they were like, they're all cuddling, they're all friendly with one another, and I'm like, oh,
No,
that's
they're all just competing for the heat source.
yeah, they're dominating each other, like, just so you know. But the weird thing about that is, excuse me, but like when you reach out to people on Craigslist, you have to be very, very careful. You don't want to say anything necessarily about their care sometimes because that'll just make them take the animals off the site,
Oh
and
yeah. See,
you'll
whenever
never
I
see them
reach out to
again.
someone on Craigslist who's rehoming something, I never even criticize their care. I don't, because if they're rehoming animals, it's probably because they're not going to get other ones in. They don't need to be lectured, right? They're trying to get rid of their animals. Just ignore the bad the stuff that's hard to ignore, and just get the animal. Like focus on getting the animal is something I always recommend to people. Going on Craigslist and berating them is not going to solve anything. Like you're just
No,
going to get them to not ever publicize their animals ever again, and that's not going to get you anywhere. So, yeah.
I yeah, like I've definitely seen not with reptiles, but stuff with like rabbits, like people who keep bunnies, like they do videos where they're calling people from Craigslist to tell them that their care is wrong, and I'm like, why would you do that? Like what? Like I get like the to them it seems like they're like it's more big with like rabbits and rodents and stuff like that, but they'll literally call these people and like try to give them advice, like unsolicited advice, and talk to them and be like, this care isn't good, like but like in my head I'm like, you're just gonna make them disappear. Like
Yeah,
now they're not gonna want to do anything.
and furthermore, they're rehoming the animal. That means they don't care. Like they're not going to receive there's zero scenario in which that advice is received well. Like either they're just going to say like, "Oh, that's nice," and not do anything because they're getting rid of the animal anyway, or they're going to be really upset and take their animal off the site. Like there's no upside scenario to that sort of a conversation.
Yeah, like it's like always like because I see with like communities on Instagram for reptiles when they post Craigslist ads, they're like, please don't go attack this person. Like we'll never see this animal again. But like with rodents and rabbits, it's very weird. Like it's almost like, yeah, you can go give them unsolicited advice, which like that's never gonna end well, like you were saying. Like
Nope.
that's just not gonna or like they'll call them and be like, you should up your pricing because this is gonna end up as snake food. And it's like sometimes people don't care about that though. Like,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know?
okay, so here's an unpopular opinion. Here's somewhere we might disagree, but if an animal's not being cared for well, it might be better for it to just be a snake meal than
I
to
mean,
go on living a miserable life.
my like whole opinion
Uh,
with that though, like I just disagree slightly for the fact that like one, like I just feel like you don't know. Like if an animal's in bad condition, I would not want to feed it to one of my animals.
oh no, yeah. Basically, if I'm ever gonna feed any animal that I didn't raise myself or I didn't buy from a feeding site, it's frozen for a solid 60 days to kill any parasites before there's any feeding that happens. And I have fed off animals before that I didn't originally get as a feeder animal or that someone gave to me. Like I've been given like pet mice by people
Hmm.
before. And I'm like, okay, like I'm happy to take it in, just so you know there's a risk. Like I might feed it to a snake later on. And like, oh, that's okay. So as long as they're okay with it, and then I freeze it for like a solid 60 days, And 60 days usually, in almost like 99% of cases, it will kill every single parasite that exists within the animal. So I have done that before. Again, unpopular opinion, and yeah, but that's something I have done before because I think it's better for an animal to like die a natural death and then continue nourishing another animal than it is for it to be living a life where it's not being cared for properly or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can see like your side of that, like, um, which I want to make it clear, it's okay to disagree with people. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
people don't understand that. Like, I feel like that's like we were talking a bit before we came on about like toxicity in the community, and I don't think people realize like it's okay to disagree. Like,
Yep.
as long as it's not like, sand or something like that's seriously harming an animal, like I don't know. I feel like people forget that people are allowed to disagree on subjects.
Yeah, I'm glad we kind of brought up like this whole thought of toxicity on the reptile community because this is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, especially in the last couple months,
Mhm.
and just figuring out how to deal with it. And I might do a video one of these days about just the issue that we have with toxicity in the reptile community. Again, kind of like what we were talking about before the show. When there's animals involved, people get their emotions involved, and when you get your
Yeah.
emotions involved, the conversation goes from logical to emotional, and then it's really really difficult to have a cohesive conversation at that point. Which I get it, right? It's an animal. You care about animals. I love animals. Like I totally get where you're coming from, but just know that the moment that conversation goes from logical to emotional, you've lost. Like it's really really hard to come out on top when you're having a completely emotional conversation.
Conversation.
Yep. Um, yeah, it's we just have there's just I the reptile community in general, they feel like they're justified to attack someone and
Yeah.
dehumanize them and berate them if there's an animal involved. And I think you can look at that from two different standpoints, right? I hold the unpopular opinion, quote unquote unpopular opinion, that people are more important than animals, right? So I'm never gonna completely dehumanize someone like that. That said, someone might be doing something wrong with their care, and I'm not afraid to call them out on that, right? That I
Yeah.
totally empathize with that. But the flip side is, if you completely berate someone and call someone out like that, they're not going to change what they're doing. And I know we've kind of hit this point a couple times, kind of throughout this podcast, but
Yeah.
berating someone is not going to help anything. The best thing you can do is offer helpful advice, and they can either receive it well or they can receive it poorly, and that's up to them. But you attacking them is never going to end well. Like if someone were to attack me because they disagree with me, there's never a point where I'm like, oh wait a minute, you yelling at me and telling me that I'm an awful person has made me realize that you're right. Like, no,
That's not how that works.
that's never gonna come out on in a good way. So I think people need to learn that it's okay to disagree on minor issues, and B, when it is a larger issue and you really don't feel comfortable disagreeing with somebody, then you just need to either walk away from the situation or handle it respectfully. Like I get it. People are awful. There's people that do awful things on the internet and awful things to their animals. I totally get it. But yelling at them isn't going to help, and that's just a fact. Um, yeah, I guess that's my kind of whole spiel on toxicity, and I'd like to do a video on that one day eventually. Just kind of saying like we need to do something because there's an issue in the reptile community, and it's pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, I don't even like personally like not that following matters, but I don't even have the following that you do, and I've run into people like constantly criticizing my care, and like it gets to a point where like I feel like the reptile community is so attackatory that they attack things without even understanding them and understanding that maybe it's not bad care per
Yeah.
se. And like I remember for a while, like one of my leopard geckos, that's like one of my pet only leopard geckos, like when I got her, she was a little overweight. And for people who don't know, like leopard geckos to lose weight, like it takes time. They
Oh
will
yeah, it
really
does.
like hold on to their fat. And like she's a lot better now. Like I mean, she's still a little chunky, but she's lost like a good amount of weight. Like and I'm really proud of her. And like I remember like personally for me, like someone just went off on me because like they use something that like I feed my insects or like my leopard geckos, I feed them insects in like a rotation. So like I do feed stuff like mealworms, but not all the time. Like I mix it in with dubia roaches, silkworms, etc. And I just like had happened to post a video of one of my leopard geckos, like not even the one that was overweight eating a mealworm, and someone like I always am okay with like constructive criticism, but someone like just attacked me and like called me a horrible, like called me names, told me I was a horrible person, that I don't deserve to have any of my animals, and that they were going to ruin my reputation when I became a breeder, all because like they were like, I saw you feeding mealworms. And like even like sometimes even explaining logically to people that like you can feed mealworms, you just shouldn't feed them in staple, they don't want to listen. And I've like run into care with that. I've run into criticisms because like my humid hides or like my enclosures aren't like super decorated. They're decorated enough to where they have the comfort and the comfortability to hide in multiple, like they have like 4 hides in enclosure and plants, but they're not like super decked out. And I've run into criticism for that. Or like for some of my crested geckos, I give them appropriate size vertical enclosures that are made out of plastic tubs that would be the same size as a 20-gallon. And I've run into people telling me like, oh, well, that's not fair. Like the animal, do they want to live in a plastic tub? Like, how would you feel if you lived in a plastic tub? And it's like, they don't really know.
How would you feel if you lived in
Yeah. And it's like, well, I'm not a crested
I
gecko.
sorry, I just banged the table, but I love it when people draw these comparisons like, "Oh, how would you feel if you were treated like that?" Like, I don't know, if I was a reptile, I wouldn't have the cognitive ability I have as a person. Like,
Yeah.
that's a false equivalent.
And so
Oh.
I guess like my long tangent point is like I don't even, I can't even imagine like someone like you, what kind of criticism like you must run into. Like I mean, it doesn't really bother me because at the end of the day I'm like, okay, you're gonna ruin me, like go ahead. Like
Go for it, try.
yeah, like I don't really care for you. And like if anything, like you yelling at me and being like you're a terrible person, like even though I know like maybe it's stuck up to say, but like I know my care is right, like I know my animals are well taken care of, but
Sure.
like imagine doing that to someone who isn't taking care of their animals like well, like you don't even know what effect that's going to have or like what that's going to cause, like I don't
Yep. Yep. Yeah,
um
I totally hear that. I did want to touch on the tub versus tank debate a little bit. What I always tell people, I get asked that question a lot. Like, I don't see why the outside container of your enclosure should matter, right?
I
It's
don't
the
either.
inside of the enclosure that has the importance, right? Your gecko is not going like, oh man, I wish this was glass. Like, that would just make my life so much better. No, of course not. It cares about, like, okay, does it have its hides? Does it have its food? Does it have, like some brush to hide in? Does it have all these different things that, your animal needs? And in that case, there's some situations where a tub is bad, right? If you have, say, a bearded dragon and it needs like a really hot spot lamp, right? If you use a
Mhm.
plastic tub, you might melt the plastic. Like, there's going to be issues like that arise. But there's many animals where like their care in a tub or in a tank is going to be exactly the same, and the only difference is that you need to adjust for the fact that tubs hold more humidity. For instance, if I keep a ball python in a tub, right, I need to adjust for the fact that it's going to be a lot more humid in a tub than it is in a tank. So I need to like spray less or mist it less when it's in the tub and mist it more when it's in the tank or whatever, however you want to adjust that
Yeah.
difference. But
um
the animal doesn't care what the edges of the enclosure are made of. It cares about what's in it.
Yeah, like I always tell people, like, because I've had people reach out with like crested geckos that are like, I have humidity issues in a glass tank, and I'm always like, personally with crested geckos, like, if you want to keep them in a tub, like, it's a lot easier to control their humidity,
Oh
like,
yeah.
and like I've never, I mean, obviously, like for me, I have humidity gauges in each one of my enclosures, but like you just have to gauge like obviously like you were saying like with a tub you just spray less like or if it's a glass tank you need to spray more but like for humidity animals if like obviously if it's like a huge humidity animal like something like a monitor like don't keep it in a tub but like if it's
Yeah.
something that can be comfortably housed and it would be the same size as a glass enclosure, I mean, go for it. Like, I do
Yeah.
it. Like,
I
I don't
agree
see a problem
100%.
with it. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're keeping something in a way too small tub, that's a whole nother argument in itself. But
Yes. Exactly.
if it's
Yes.
the proper sizing, I don't see
Yep.
what the big deal is. Like, I don't know. I just feel like people are so quick in the reptile community to attack anything that isn't how they do it. Like,
Yep. 100%.
it's just weird to me. I mean, maybe all communities, I guess, have their negativity, but I feel like in the past couple years, the reptile community has gotten pretty bad. Like
Yep. So
it baffles
it
me.
it's kind of interesting. I wasn't really involved in the reptile community until I started the YouTube channel at all. So I had no idea that this vast community kind of existed. And in some ways, it's been like a blessing and a curse, right? In many ways, I've loved connecting with a ton of other people that are into reptiles that share my interests because I haven't really had many friends that share my interests that like I have in person,
I
for many,
relate.
many years.
Yeah.
But on the internet, there's all kinds of people that you can meet that share your interests and all kinds of fun characters and interesting things. But the curse side of it is that you're criticized for everything, and you always feel like you're kind of fighting a battle. You need to put up this image of like perfection. And sometimes, like I've done things where I don't even think they're necessary, but I'll do it just because this animal's going to be in a video, and I'm like, I know I'm going to be attacked if I don't do this. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Um, yeah, I mean, even some of my leopard geckos, I keep them in tub setups, right? But I typically don't ever show those in a video just because people are gonna jump on that, and that's not necessarily a battle I want to fight. Now, one day I might make a video where I talk about specifically my thoughts on keeping geckos in tubs and how that works out. But until I do that video, I don't want to have to fight that battle every single video just because it's in the background of this main shot or whatever. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, because like people would just nitpick and point it
Yeah.
out. Like I think it comes in the whole like breeding rack system thing too, where like I want to delve on that. Like, because personally, I just don't. I wouldn't mind doing a breeding rack system. I just think the issue that runs into that is that people keep too small of tubs.
Yes.
A lot of the time. But like people don't even acknowledge because there are good breeders who do use a rack system, but they have appropriate sized tubs.
Oh
And
yeah.
people don't talk about that. Like they
Yeah.
still just want to be like, no, shame, you're doing a tub instead of glass enclosures. But they don't look at the side that if you're a breeder, like you're keeping a ton of animals. And if you're not making a gecko bookshelf, like those enclosures build up,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
like I'm sure
Totally.
you've run into that, like where I've had to get like shelving units in my room. I have like huge shelving units in my room just to keep all my animals on to make sure like it's
Yep.
not cluttering up the space.
So almost all of my snakes are in glass setups still, which is a ton of glass setups that I have.
Yeah.
But virtually all of my leopard geckos, I keep them in 20-gallon tubs, which it's actually more floor space than a 20-gallon terrarium because it's not as much height. So the geckos have all the floor space they need. They have all their hides, they have everything they need. They're just in a tub setup. And the one thing I always stress with a tub, for virtually any animal is if you're going to use a tub, you need to get something that's clear or have some way to light the inside of it because your animal still needs to set its circadian rhythm, right? It still needs to have a daytime and a nighttime so it knows when to fall asleep and be awake, whether it's nocturnal or diurnal. It still needs to have that daylight at some point during the day for 12 hours during the
Mhm.
day, approximately. And that's my kind of big issue with some of the breeder racks is sometimes
They're in
the
pitch black.
yeah, sometimes the enclosures are just solid colors, so they don't actually have they're not actually getting light at all, so they're just sitting in darkness 24/7, which is certainly not healthy for the mental health of your animal. Which I get that that's a bit of a touchy word because we have really it's kind of virtually impossible to measure mental health of an animal. But I think the
Hmm.
best that we can do is compare it to how they're living in the wild, and then we see okay how can we improve on the wild habitat and what are ways that we need to actually maintain from the wild habitat. For instance, there's some animals that naturally live on sand in the wild, but they don't need sand in captivity, and it actually, reduces impaction risks or whatever
Like
in
beardeds
captivity.
and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, no, I like agree with that like completely because like I definitely have seen arguments for beardeds on sand, like well in Australia, and it's like, well, yeah, in the wild they only live like 4 years. So
Exactly.
what's your
Yes.
point? Or like,
In the wild, they get, attacked by birds. Should I put a bird in my enclosure?
I mean, hey, you could be like that one guy and do a room and just
Yeah, exactly.
create an ecosystem,
Yeah.
which I mean, the biggest, like, I mean, to a degree, I think bioactive, I'm all for bioactive, but keeping a bunch of animals, in one
Yeah.
enclosure,
Yeah.
But yeah, like I definitely was agreeing, like with the tub systems, I think if you use like sterilite bins, like where they're kind of clear, I think it's
Yep.
fine. I think
Oh
it's
yeah.
100% fine. Like they get their light, they understand, but I would never advocate for anyone to keep like a blacked out tub. Like I
Yep.
always advocate like keep something clear or like Sterilite. Sterilite's a great brand to use. From what I've noticed with my crested geckos, like it's great. Like it's clear enough that they can see. I mean, the worst thing that you can say about a clear tub is that it doesn't look aesthetic to us or it doesn't look pleasing to us,
Yep.
but the animal doesn't care. Like the animal's like, cool.
Yep. Now, I have seen setups before where they're using a blacked out tub for specific animals that are like really, really easily stressed animals, like certain
Hmm.
chameleons or whatever that are extremely stressable. I've seen them use a blackout tub, but then they actually have a small hole in the top, and that's where the lamp sits. So it's still getting like a 12-hour light exchange. It's just not able to see the outside world, which totally makes sense to me, right? Because you're reducing the stress they're getting while still applying everything else they need, which is awesome. That's great when people do that sometimes. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no,
just it's
it
just
just depends.
understanding the negatives that a tub can use and then being able to adjust from them. And if you do that, then you'll be just fine.
Yeah, like people have asked me like, would you suggest for someone using a tub if it's their first animal? And I was like, you know what? If they have like, if they're ready to like make the proper requirements and do research into keeping in a tub, why not?
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
why not? Like, it doesn't. I mean, like I said, it just doesn't look aesthetically pleasing to us. And like,
Yep.
they're I from what I've noticed, tubs are way easier to deep clean than glass enclosures.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, glass enclosures are.
Yep.
Deep cleaning them is really hard, especially if you have a high humidity animal because of all the water spots that show up. I've noticed they come a lot more in glass tubs than they do in not glass tubs, glass enclosures than they do in plastic tubs. Like it gets a lot
Yeah.
worse real quick.
And yeah, you can't really even see them in plastic enclosure, so it doesn't matter if the water stain is there. But in a glass enclosure, you ideally want to look through the glass enclosure, so you
Yeah.
really don't like those water stains.
Yeah. I don't know. People like I could spend 2 hours talking about the toxicity in the reptile community just because
Yeah,
it's a big oof.
it
It's
is.
uh, it's really sad to me like that like we could have like such a great positive community but instead everyone wants to attack everyone because of X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
Like I definitely unpopular opinion, I don't think cancel culture is good.
Oh
um
no, I don't think it is either. Now,
like I
I think there's some regards like, okay, if this person is like on our platform and they're saying things that we fundamentally disagree with, then sure. But this whole overhyped cancel culture, like we're gonna go through your Twitter and look at stuff that you said 12 years ago, that's a little much.
Yeah, or like I don't know. I never think it's appropriate, even if animals are involved. Like it's never appropriate to send death threats or
Oh no,
like
not at all.
threaten to dox somebody. Like doxing's a huge issue. Like that just exists now because of cancel culture, and like that's scary. It makes it scary to like put yourself out there because if someone disagrees with you, like God forbid, someone decides I'm gonna dox you. Like it's a whole mess. If you ever do a video on it, I'd love to watch that cuz I don't see it talked about that much via YouTube like cancel culture in the reptile community and toxicity. But
Yeah, it would be. I don't know. We'll see if I ever get there or not. That would be a very. I would need to be very careful about how I produced a video like that. That'd be very interesting.
for sure. Well, before we end off, I just wanted to ask you maybe about some of the current herps you have on the site and like just maybe a little bit more about that, like what you have available right now.
Sure. Let me actually pull up our homepage so I can see. I have so many reptiles in right now. I have a document where I keep everything straight, but to see which ones are actually up available. Let's see. Who do we have? That's interesting. Oh, so we have this melanistic jeweled lacerda, which is pretty cool. So I got her in quite a while back as well, and I was really hoping I could kind of socialize her up a little bit, and that's one of the reasons I've been hanging on to her for so long. Is I was really hoping I could turn her into something that was more like a bearded dragon, but she's just been really really difficult to work with. Um,
And
you
I
can
can
see
tell.
even I
I
don't.
can tell. Yeah.
Yes, she's a lot of fun. She's an absolutely phenomenal eater. Really, really pretty animal, and she just looks like a dinosaur. It's very, very wild looking animal, and her skin is actually really, really soft. It's like a velvety feeling skin.
Oh.
It's really, really interesting to handle her and work with her. But she still can be pretty feisty. She's definitely gotten better from when I got her, but she's not there yet. That's for sure. Who else do we have? Oh yeah, we have a bell albino snow het radar leopard gecko. That's kind of up your alley. This gecko is actually really interesting. I don't know if you can tell through the website, but the photos themselves are actually a much lower quality than all the other leopard gecko photos on the site, and that's because this guy's just like really sensitive to lights. Like he really, really does not like the bright video light, so he will just close his eyes and curl up in a ball under the bright video light. So in order to get any photos in which he had his eyes open, I actually needed to just shoot him under like regular room lights, which was like a really high ISO and really grainy images. Definitely below the bar that my photos are usually at when I post them.
A lot of
But
albinos are very sensitive to light, though. Like, that's just something that you'll see.
yeah, it's very interesting how some of them are and some of them aren't.
Oh, yeah.
Like the two rescue leopard geckos, albino rescue leopard geckos that we had that I was telling you about earlier. They don't mind the lights at all. Like they just don't care. They're really chill. So it's weird seeing those differences, and I guess that's one of the things that makes reptile keeping so fun is the fact that you have animals that have individual quirks and personality traits or physical traits. I guess that's one of the more rewarding aspects of working with all these animals.
Yeah, I would imagine like cuz not I always like to advocate like even if leopard geckos have similar personalities, not one is the same. Like
Yes. Yep. 100%. They're very different. Let me see. Who else do we have coming up onto the site soon that I could tell you about? Who's been an interesting case? Oh, well, I guess I have the bearded dragon that just came in today. She's pretty interesting. She's a very, very large bearded dragon. She's at least 20 inches, so
oh
she's
wow.
really long. But she's actually pretty underweight. She's not on the not on death row or anything, but she's got her hip bones are sticking out a little bit, and you can see kind of the ridge down her spine. So she's definitely going to need to gain a lot of weight before she's ready to go anywhere. But she's really, really active, really, really aware, and a pretty cool looking bearded dragon. She's sitting on my desk right now, just staring at me.
That's really exciting. Well, I'll be looking out for her and for all the other herps you eventually list. Before we end off, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and taking time out of your day, man. Like, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I'd love to come on again sometime.
Of course, I'd totally love to have you again. Have a good one.
Great. See you later.